One of the premises of this whole piece of work is to understand the brain and to understand what's happening in the brain. The key themes for me today for you will be about your attention, becoming aware of your attention, how you use your attention, and how that translates into engagement. Attention turns out to be the thing that is the currency of engagement. So where you can give your attention to someone else well in a particular way, then engagement rises. And we're going to be talking about what the behaviours are today that cause the engagement to increase. The problem is we've got to work against a lot of things that are in the brain. So one of the premises that we've got here is to understand elements of the brain. And this is a model that's a little bit old now, but is still useful to a degree, where the brain seems to have three distinct regions. Now, whenever we talk about the brain, always be very, very careful of models that say this is how it works, because there will always be a limitation. The brain is the most complex thing known to man. It is still beyond belief in many, many ways. So there are absolute limitations to everything I'm showing you today. So there will be something that will be an exception to the rule. But by and large, we have these three sections to the brain. And the first one on the left-hand side is the most ancient, and it's the brainstem and the cerebellum at the back of the head. If you've worked here in the past few years, if you're a regular member of the staff room, you would have used your cerebellum to drive here, because it's where habit lies, it's where knowing how to get somewhere is, it's knowing how to do something, where your golf swing is hardwired, it's where your beliefs about who you are and how things should work sit. All of your habits tend to sit in this area here. Very, very efficient part of the brain, the most efficient part of the brain. This is why under pressure you fall back on your habits, because it's the most efficient part. It's sometimes called the reptilian brain because it shares the way it tends to look and behave with reptiles. This middle part of the brain is the mammalian brain, again because it tends to share its function and geography with mammals in general, and it's the emotional centre of the brain. It's where you learn from experience. It's where you have a threat-based system interacting with the alarm system here. So this is where your radars are up for feeling uncomfortable. And the invitation today is when you will feel uncomfortable from time to time. I'm not going to do it in any way that's horrible, but there will be times when you'll start to experience this threat-based system. One of the invitations will be get really intimate with it in the sense of knowing how it expresses in yourself, because that's one of the keys here. These two little white dots at the front of that area here are called the amygdala, and these are the alarm system effectively. These are the things that detect threat in some way and start to act upon the fight or flight that's in this part of the brain. And then lastly, we've got this massively larger area which is really very well expressed in humans, often called, in the book we call the human brain. It's not necessarily the best way to call it, the cortical brain, because it's named the cortex. It's like a folded piece of napkin, or a napkin folded up, all scrunched up so it can actually fit inside the space. That's where you think, it's where I'm speaking from. I'm using my brain in this area particularly now, right here in this part of my brain, to construct speech. You're actually using the opposite side of your brain up around the top here to interpret what I'm saying, interpret meaning from it. Also to interpret emotion from what I'm saying as very well too. This front part here is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today. And indeed, if you feel tired at the end of the day, it's because you've been using this part of your brain here more than this. This is 5 times more efficient. This uses 5 times more energy than the rest of your brain. So when you're concentrating and focusing and being in the moment and using this lovely, hugely potential part of your brain, the cost is that it takes a lot of energy. I haven't found the research yet that says it uses enough energy for us to be able to lose weight in the same way as exercise, which would be rather nice, and I think I'd make a little bit of money if I could find that. But it certainly is the part of the brain that is most active and least efficient. In the construct of the book, we use the blue zone and the red zone. Many of you are familiar with that. I'm not going to dwell on that as much as I might if you hadn't have heard of that before. But the blue zone is the combination of the mammalian brain with the awareness part of the brain, part of the brain that can think and language, process, set goals, understand how other people are feeling, all these sorts of things in conjunction with this huge store of knowledge that is sublingual, the experience, in other words, instinct. That's where all this tends to sit. So when we're using, by and large, that combination of our brain, then we are often at our best. We're optimistic, we're bright, we're collaborative, we're creative. More than anything, we feel confident. Confidence is expressed in this part of the brain up here. What would be the opposite to confidence?
Apprehension.
Apprehension, it's a good word. Anxiety, that's the word I tend to use a bit. That's expressed by some sort of threat. So the opposite to confidence, courage perhaps, is this sense of, now I've got some funny colours happening here, but you'll understand what that is. So the red zone is when we're not necessarily at our best. It's when our mammalian emotional system is engaged largely with the habits of our brain, particularly the fight and flight habits, but other parts of our brain that are automatic. So automatic high levels of emotion, you can imagine, are good examples of things like rage, are good examples of being in this red zone state. It's very easy to think, oh, red zone's bad, blue zone's good. That's not the case, they're just two different states. This one tends to be better, in fact is far better, when we're in touch and trying to develop other people in some way. The red zone is far from useful, even harmful in situations, particularly education, and we'll see how that happens a bit later on. Are there any questions about the red zone, blue zone, or any observations about red zone, blue zone at all? We might explore that a little bit further during the day, but again it's a model that is quite good at explaining many things, but there are some things that don't quite fit. But by and large, what characterises the two are in the red zone. When you are in your big red zone moments, you don't think very well because the brain is losing resources from this part of the brain that thinks. You don't make choices very well and you're not very aware. You're just in the heat of the moment, basically. So lack of awareness, lack of choice, and a self-centeredness. The old story of someone pushing in a queue when you're tired on a Friday night and you're hungry and you're waiting for whatever fast food you're waiting for. Often the first thought is, I was here first. So very, very strong self-orientation in this area here. Generosity, altruism, all those sorts of socially oriented thoughts tend to flow, in fact do flow, from this prefrontal cortex or the blue zone. So there's social orientation. In this state here, when you start to get cranky, you can say, oh gee, I'm getting a bit cranky here, aren't I? And you can then make some choices. I need to go and sit down, or I need to withdraw myself, or I need to take a few deep breaths. So there's awareness and choice that's going on. So an analogy or a metaphor that I can build for you here that I've often used is that in the red zone state, it's like running to catch a train without knowing where it's going, and you just jump on board and you're gone. So in other words, the red zone train's taken you to the outcome without much choice and without much awareness. This one here is a bit like being on a station overpass, a bit like Southern Cross, and watching the trains coming in and out, the trains of thought, the emotions, the feelings, and having a choice about whether you might engage or not in each of those. It's a very mindful state. You can get a sense of distance from that. So the blue zone state allows you to see things from a perspective that's a bit higher than being right involved. Two metaphors here, a bit like watching a game of football compared with being in the game of football. So if you're up in the stands watching the game, you can see strategy, you can see choice, you can see the big picture. When you're down playing the game, all you can see is the play that's in front of you. So they're the large differences between the two.